Questions are now the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On what date and at what time was the Prime Minister informed that Nigel Wright had made a payment to Conservative Senator Mike Duffy?
Bravo. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have been very clear on this question. This matter came to my attention 2 weeks ago after speculation appeared in the media. On Wednesday, May the 15th, I was told about it. At that very moment, I demanded that my office ensure that the public is informed, and they were informed appropriately.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
When did the Prime Minister first speak with Nigel Wright about Mike Duffy's expenses?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I have said repeatedly, my first knowledge of this was on the date, and at the time indicated prior to that point in time, it was my understanding that Mr. Duffy had paid back his own expenses.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The question was, when did the Prime Minister first speak with Nigel Wright about Mike Duffy's expenses, and how many times did he speak with Nigel Wright in the week preceding his resignation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the NDP is suggesting that I had any information to the contrary from Mr. Wright prior to this, that is completely false. I learned of this on May the 15th, immediately made that information public, as I have said many times before.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We're asking very simple, straightforward questions, and the Prime Minister is not answering them. That's the problem. Canadians want answers.
What directives did the Prime Minister give to Nigel Wright or to other members of his office to resolve the problems with spending by Senator Mike Duffy? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I didn't give directives. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker. My view was that Mr. Duffy should pay back his own expenditures, and that was what I believed until May 15th.
Then what changed? Between the time that the Prime Minister expressed his total, absolute support of Nigel Wright and the moment that he accepted his resignation just 3 days later. What changed?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Wright accepted full responsibility for his error in this matter. He offered his resignation, and I accepted that resignation. As we know, he will be subject to an examination by the Ethics Commissioner, and that is the accountability mechanism that we've put in place for these kinds of situations.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Benjamin Perrin nie avoir pris part à la
denies that he was involved in the decision to give money to Senator Mike Duffy, but he did not deny that he prepared the agreement for Nigel Wright. Can the Prime Minister tell us what role Mr. Perrin played in this affair?
Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Perrin has already answered those questions. It was Mr. Wright who cut a check to Mr. Duffy, and according to our information to date, he played no other role. Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister is still playing around with the same words, no legal agreement, but there must have been an exchange of emails. Something should be produced because there were emails. A check is a legal document. It's negotiable. It should be tabled. We will be able to see whether it's personal and whether it's a trust.
Pamela Wallin, what did he learn from the audit of Ms. Wallin's expenses that led him to ask Senator Wallin to resign from the Conservative caucus after having expressed full confidence in her and having said in this House that he had personally checked her expenses and that they were fine? What changed?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, that's correct. That's incorrect. What we said Mr. Speaker, is there would be an examination of the expenses of all senators. There is, in fact, an ongoing audit of Senator Wallin's expenses. Senator Wallin has chosen to step outside the Conservative caucus until such time as that audit reports and the matters that may or may not be raised in it are resolved.
Did the Prime Minister ever discuss this matter in Cabinet?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate committee has been very clear. It made its own report on these matters. The government's position is also extremely well known. Inappropriate expenditures, when people claim expenditures that they never actually incurred, these are inappropriate and must be repaid to the taxpayers.
Prime Minister keeps trying to convince Canadians that he's being straightforward. That was a very straightforward and simple question. Did he ever discuss this matter in Cabinet?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate committee report is a Senate committee report. It is not a matter of government or cabinet business. That is plainly obvious.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
When was the Prime Minister made aware of an agreement? We're talking about the agreement, not the payment. When was he made aware that an agreement had been reached between the Conservative Senator Mike Duffy? What is the date? Mr. Speaker, the Wednesday, May 15th, was the day that Mr. Wright informed me that he gave a personal check to Mr. Duffy so that he could pay taxpayers back. Up until that point, I was under the understanding that Mr. Duffy had repaid his own expenses.
When the Prime Minister's office spoke with Mr. Duffy about withholding information from auditors or others investigating this matter.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have no information to that effect. Obviously, as I've said repeatedly, the arrangements between Mr. Duffy and Mr. Wright are a matter of inquiry of both commissioners of ethics commissioners of both houses of this Parliament, and obviously we will provide any support necessary in those examinations.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mike Duffy wrote in an email that after being paid $90,000, he, quote, stayed silent on the orders of the Prime Minister's office. Who told Mike Duffy to remain silent?
Excellent. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, these are not matters that I am privy to. This is an email. This is an email from Mike Duffy, who is no longer a member of our caucus and certainly never conveyed that information to me.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Once Mike Duffy received the $90,000 from the Prime Minister's office, he stopped cooperating with Deloitte, who were the auditors in the file. Was that part of the deal with Mike Duffy?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note the falsehood in that particular question. Mr. Duffy has received no money from the Prime Minister's office or from the taxpayers of Canada. Mr. Wright has been very clear that Mr. Wright gave this money to Mr. Duffy out of his own personal resources, and to my knowledge, there is no legal agreement between the two of them.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, when the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, in the course of his functions, from the Prime Minister's office, gives $90,000 to shut up a sitting senator, that's out of the Prime Minister's office. No legal document? A check is a document. Do they have a copy of the check? Has the Prime Minister or anyone in his office seen that check?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the Leader of the NDP just said, there is no check from the Prime Minister's office. There is no use of Prime Minister's office funds in this affair. This was an action Mr. Wright took using his own resources, on which he is now subject to examination and accountability by the Ethics Commission.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
If he's never seen the check, how can the Prime Minister rise in this House and tell us that it's a personal check? How does he know that it's not from a trust account? How does he know that if he's never seen the check?
Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is a matter of public record, as Mr. Wright himself has said. I can certainly assure the member there is no such money that has gone out of our office or out of PMO budget.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister acknowledged the existence of the email in which Mike Duffy wrote that he stayed silent on the orders of the Prime Minister's office. Who in the Prime Minister's office has a copy of that email?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is an email, I understand, of Mr. Duffy, a former Conservative senator. Obviously, the activities, as we know well, the activities of Mr. Duffy are being looked into by the appropriate authorities, and of course, any and all information we have will be shared with those authorities.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Has the RCMP contacted the Prime Minister's office to obtain that email or all other documents that they have in relation to this matter?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to my knowledge, we've had no such contact. That, of course, Mr. Speaker, would be very different, I understand, than the leader of the NDP, who, after 17 years of apparently knowing about the activities of the Mayor of Laval, who is now charged with various offences, did not reveal that information to the public and the police until very recently. Any information we have that is relevant, we will reveal immediately.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Who did the Prime Minister give the mandate to for looking after the crisis regarding illegal spending in the Senate? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand the question exactly. The Senate is responsible for managing its affairs and overseeing expenditures, but because of the events in this case, the Senate has called upon other authorities to conduct investigations. Those investigations are underway, and we are looking at people who are acting inappropriately. When did the illegal expenditure file, when in fact was it discussed at Cabinet for the first time? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the NDP leader knows full well that we do not discuss those issues at Cabinet.
Of course. Well, we, of course, are sworn not to discuss Cabinet matters publicly. I can certainly say that these matters were not a matter of public business at any point, Mr. Speaker. This is not, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, as we have said, this matter became aware to me on May the 15th. I immediately made that information public. Very different than the leader of the NDP, who withheld information on the wrongdoing of the Mayor of Laval for 17 years.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That's interesting. That wasn't yesterday's excuse.
No.
Est-ce que le Premier ministre
Does the Prime Minister have proof that the $90,000 check from his Chief of Staff to Mike Duffy was a personal check? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, that is what Mr. Wright said, and I insisted immediately that the public be informed. Clearly, Mr. Wright is subject to an investigation by the Ethics Commissioner.
As soon as this information was conveyed to me by the former Chief of Staff, I immediately insisted he go to the appropriate authorities, the information be made public. totally different than the leader of the NDP who withheld that information from the public and from the police for 17 years.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Now, the Prime Minister just said that before the 15th of May, he thought that Mike Duffy had reimbursed expenditures using his own resources. But the question is this: what is the Prime Minister basing himself on to assume that Mike Duffy had even accepted to pay back those expenses? Who informed him of that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it was my understanding that Mr. Duffy had paid back his own expenses. He made that statement.
Duffy himself said that publicly. However, as little as 3 years ago, the leader of the NDP said he knew absolutely nothing about the affairs of the former mayor of Laval that are now being investigated by the Charbonneau Commission. It's up to him, Mr. Speaker, to explain why, when he knew such information, he did not think it relevant to tell the public or the authorities.
The Leader of the Opposition. During a typical day, how many times would the Prime Minister speak to his Chief of Staff? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I don't understand that question.
Order. Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has the floor.
The Chief of Staff, former Chief of Staff, didn't inform me of the payment before the 15th. I've said that very clearly. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, why did the Leader of the Opposition refuse to disclose the information he was aware of regarding the activities of the former Mayor of Laval for 17 years? The Leader of the Opposition.
When did the Prime Minister first speak with Nigel Wright about the whole question of the Senate expenses scandal? When?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, obviously we all spoke of this as soon as the story was in the news. As I've said repeatedly, I was not aware of any payment made by Mr. Wright before the 15th of May. But, Mr. Speaker, what I don't understand is how the entire Quebec construction industry can be mired in a deep scandal involving mayors and public officials all across the province, subject to an inquiry called by the government he was a member of, and that for all of those years he not thought it relevant to inform the authorities and the public that he had been offered considerations by the Mayor of Laval.
The Honourable Leader of the... The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order. 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 The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport explicitly said that the $90,000 check was issued, and I quote, because we didn't believe taxpayers should have to pay the cost, and Mr. Duffy was not in a position to pay them himself. Who's we?
The Right Honourable. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, Mr. Wright has been clear that his motive was he wanted to see the taxpayers recompense for expenses that we all believed were inappropriate. And obviously it is important that those expenses be recovered. It is also important that all the people who have been involved in this be subject to the appropriate investigations and held accountable. And once again, Mr. Speaker, when we knew this information, it's all been rendered public. I contrast this with the leader of the NDP, who withheld vital information on the improper activities of the Mayor of Laval for 17 years, even during a provincial royal commission.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Est-ce que Nigel Wright
Did Nigel Wright receive severance pay? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Wright will receive the amounts that he is entitled to under the law, and that is it. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He's entitled to his entitlements. Quelle est la valeur de la prime de séparation?
How much is the separation payment that Nigel Wright is entitled to? Would it be of the order of $90,000 by chance? The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Amounts under the law, such as certain accumulated vacation pay. Those policies are clear. The government cannot work around them. Mr. Wright will be paid only those amounts of money. And Mr. Speaker, once again, we have been absolutely clear about this matter, unlike the Leader of the NDP.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister's office was first informed of this matter on May 14th. Who in the Prime Minister's office knew on May 14th?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear that Mr. Wright informed myself of this on May the 15th. We've been very clear on that. As soon as we knew that information, we made it public. If we'd known earlier, we would have made it public earlier. Unlike the Leader of the NDP, who, when confronted with information regarding the improper activities of a mayor who is now charged with various corruption offences, refused to provide that information to the public or to the authorities for 17 years.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Has the Prime Minister asked that all emails to and from Nigel Wright's email account in the Prime Minister's office be examined to see if there's any reference whatsoever to the Mike Duffy affair or to any and all documents concerning the Mike Duffy affair?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we have put in place the appropriate authorities to investigate such matters when they arise. We will obviously assist those authorities, and we will ensure that anybody who's broken any rules or laws is held accountable. And we are doing so promptly, Mr. Speaker, unlike the Leader of the NDP, who, in spite of the fact he knew about the inappropriate activities of the former Mayor of Laval and has now admitted it after having denied it in public repeatedly, refused to provide that information.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
What did the Prime Minister learn from the audit of Pamela Wallin's expenses that led her to resign from the Conservative caucus?
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I think you will know well, the audit of Senator Wallin's expenses is not, in fact, complete. Senator Wallin has chosen to step outside of the caucus until those matters are resolved. She obviously will not be readmitted unless those matters are resolved, and if she has in any way acted improperly, she will be subject to the appropriate authorities and consequences for those actions.
The Prime Minister has said that he did not find out about the payment from Nigel Wright to Mike Duffy until May 15th. However, yesterday, his cabinet colleague, Marjorie Le Breton, said, quote, on the 14th of May, the Prime Minister dealt with it. Who's telling the truth?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear. I learned of this matter on the 15th of May and, of course, immediately made this information public. Mr. Speaker, the real question is why the Leader of the NDP, on November the 16th, 2010, said he knew nothing about the activities of the Mayor of Laval, which are now before the Charbonneau Commission, when in fact he had known for 14 years.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
À quelle date exactement?
On what date exactly did the Prime Minister speak for the first time with Mike Duffy about his spending? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, this information has already been made public. I've been very clear. On February 13th, after a caucus meeting, Mr. Duffy approached me to discuss this matter, and Mr. Speaker, since the beginning my position has been clear. Inappropriate spending must be repaid to the taxpayers by the senators in question. And Mr. Speaker, the real question, though, is why the leader of the NDP said something that was the opposite of his knowledge to the public concerning the Mayor of Laval in 2010. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Le Premier ministre peut-il confirmer?
Can the Prime Minister confirm that that was the same day on which he ordered his caucus to repay their illegal expenses? Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear about all of these matters, very clear about the dates, and my position on this matter has been known from the beginning. I believe that any inappropriate expenses should be refunded to taxpayers. My statements in private and in public have been consistent with that. Unlike the leader of the NDP, who told the public he knew nothing about the goings-on of the Mayor of Laval in 2010, when in fact he had known the contrary for 14 years. Why did he misinform the public of his knowledge of what the Mayor of Laval did?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Est-ce qu'il y avait des
Were there members of the Prime Minister's staff who were present when he ordered his caucus to repay their illegal expenses? Were there members of his staff who were present, yes or no? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, my position is known by our caucus and obviously by my employees since the beginning. And that is that senators must repay taxpayers for any inappropriate spending.
I've been very clear, very public, very consistent. Why did the leader of the NDP, as a contrast, not think it important to tell the public in 2010 that he knew of questionable activity from the Mayor of Laval? Why did he tell the public precisely the opposite when he knew that to be the case?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Why then did the Prime Minister last week deny instructing any members of his personnel to settle the Mike Duffy matter when he gave that order with that personnel present in the room at a caucus meeting in February of this year?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was my view from the beginning that any inappropriate expenses by any senator should be repaid by the senator, not by somebody else. That was very clear, Mr. Speaker, and those are the facts obviously before us. And as I say, my statements on this have been very clear and very consistent, totally different than the honourable member who keeps refusing to answer questions as to why his knowledge of bribery attempts were not clearly and correctly conveyed to the public and the police over a period of 17 years.
The scandal had been in the news for 3 months when the Prime Minister ordered the members of his caucus, including Mike Duffy, to reimburse their illegal expenses. Mike Duffy refused. But a week later, he accepted, he changed his mind, and he said he was going to reimburse. What did the Prime Minister's staff say to Mike Duffy to get him to change his mind and accept to reimburse?
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our position from the beginning, as I think we've been very clear, is that any inappropriate expenses should be reimbursed. Obviously, in late February, Mr. Duffy said he would do that, and in the middle of April, he said he had done that, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the facts of the matter are, as we learned later, not to that effect. When I learned those facts, I made them clear immediately. Mr. Speaker, and we've been very clear on this. Unlike the leader of the NDP, who continues to refuse, why, for For 17 years, he has not been truthful with the Canadian people or the authorities on his knowledge of the affairs that are now before the Charbonneau Commission.
Order. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
La semaine dernière,
Last week, the Prime Minister's office confirmed that it was the Prime Minister himself who had asked Mike Duffy to reimburse his expenses.
qui était présent
Who was present when the Prime Minister asked Mike Duffy to reimburse his expenses? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have said from the beginning that inappropriate expenses must be reimbursed to the taxpayers. I've been clear, transparent, and my answers are the same. But, Mr. Speaker, once again, the leader of the NDP refuses to tell us why he hid the truth on the activities of the Mayor of Laval for a period of 15 years, Mr. Speaker. It is finally high time for him to answer those questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
le bureau du Premier ministre
The Prime Minister's office says that it is the Prime Minister himself who spoke with Mike Duffy to ask him to reimburse the expenses. Who was there during that conversation? Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Clear, my views were known to the entire caucus. Mr. Duffy approached me to seek some clarification. I was very adamant, Mr. Speaker, that any inappropriate expenses should be repaid. Those are the facts of the matter, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear and consistent on that. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we're waiting for some clarity and some consistency from the leader of the NDP on matters that are now before a major commission. Mr. Speaker, maybe if this individual had been clear with the public and with authorities some 17 years ago, the kind of things that led to the Charbonneau Commission would not be happening.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On May 17th, the Prime Minister's Director of Communications said, and I quote, "The Prime Minister has full confidence in Mr. Wright, and Mr. Wright is staying on." Who told Andrew McDougall to say that?
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Wright believed, as we all believe, that the taxpayers of Canada should be reimbursed for the inappropriate expenses. He, Mr. Speaker, decided to do that on his own without informing us. For that reason, upon reflection, I accepted his resignation, Mr. Speaker, and as soon as I learned of the relevant information, I made that on May the 15th, I made that public. Mr. Speaker, once again, if I, as the leader of the NDP, when knowing about things like bribery, think it is not appropriate for 17 years to appropriately inform the police and the public about those kinds of matters.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Last week, the Prime Minister confirmed that Nigel Wright will be receiving an executive severance package. Is that severance package greater than $90,000 or less than $90,000?
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I've been very clear. Mr. Wright will receive only the monies that are required absolutely under law. Those amounts are obviously less than the amount in question. Let me be absolutely clear. Any suggestion that Mr. Wright is being compensated by taxpayers directly or indirectly for his check to Mr. Duffy is absolutely and categorically false.
Order. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Was Ray Novak involved in any discussions about the Senate expense scandal?
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, Mr. Wright decided to do this on his own, using his own funds, and he has taken full responsibility, Mr. Speaker, and he will be accountable to the various authorities and inquiries for his actions in that regard. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the leader of the NDP to do the same thing. He sat in the Cabinet of Quebec for years when the Cabinet of Quebec was doing business with the Mayor of Laval and others. There are now matters of inquiry before the Charbonneau Commission. Why did he think, as a Minister of the Crown, it was not appropriate to inform the public and the authorities of his knowledge of the dealings of that particular individual?
Hear, 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 hear. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Did Senator Marjorie Le Breton recuse herself from any of the Cabinet discussions involving the Senate expense scandal? Now, we're not talking about the illegal payment from Nigel Wright to Mike Duffy. We are talking about whether or not she recused herself from Cabinet. This is not a question of Cabinet confidence. The Prime Minister has to answer.
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last week the member asked if this was ever a member of an order of Cabinet business, the matter of Cabinet business. I said it wasn't a matter of Cabinet business, so why would someone recuse themselves from something that wasn't a matter of Cabinet business? I think the answer to that question is pretty obvious before you even ask it, which makes it pretty obvious why the leader of the NDP simply doesn't want to answer questions about his knowledge of potentially illegal activities in Quebec that he was fully knowledgeable of. Why not? Why not come clean on that side?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor.
Who is responsible for the Senate at the Prime Minister's office? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, according to our Constitution, the Senate is an independent body. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, we always have discussions with our colleagues in the Senate, just like we do with all parties. And Mr. Speaker, once again, why is the NDP, why doesn't he tell the truth and come clean to the public and with the authorities about his knowledge and of possibly illegal activities of the Mayor of Laval for over 15 years? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Last week we learned that Mike Duffy regularly billed taxpayers for partisan political work that he did for and on behalf of the Conservative Party, especially during the last election campaign. Are there other senators who did the same thing, that is, billing the taxpayer for partisan work on behalf of the Conservative Party? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The Conservative Party has been very clear that it pays for its own campaign expenses.
Here that it pays its own campaign expenses. In fact, those were reported, and in fact, when we became aware that Mr. Duffy had possibly, in effect, double billed, that's obviously why the Senate has now referred the matter to other authorities. Once again, Mr. Speaker, in this case, the Conservative Party acted immediately on the information it knew. Why, when knowing, Mr. Speaker, why, when knowing about envelopes stuffed full of cash, did the leader of the NDP not think it appropriate for 17 years to report these matters to the public and to the police?
Canadians want answers about the secret $1 million fund being run out of the Prime Minister's office. Canadians deserve answers. Where's the Prime Minister? Où est le Premier Ministre?
Where's the Prime Minister? Canadians deserve a response from their Prime Minister.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition wants answers, he shouldn't ask factually inaccurate questions. The story upon which he bases his question is false. There is no such fund. In fact, all Conservative partisan expenses come out of a single bank account that is controlled by the Conservative Party of Canada. And the Prime Minister, when he incurs partisan expenses, instead of going to the taxpayer to pay for them, he goes to the Conservative Party, and that is exactly the way it should be.
Before his resignation, did Nigel Wright talk with ever any management in the Conservative Party about the Senate spending scandal, particularly with the policy director of the Conservative Party, Jenny Byrne? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Wright himself had said that he had acted alone in what he did with Mr. Duffy. That is why he resigned, because he alone did that.
Leader of the Opposition.
Correction. Nigel Wright never said that he acted alone. He said that he alone assumed the responsibility. This is an important nuance. When he was Chief of Staff at the PMO, Nigel Wright controlled, in particular, partisan political polls for and on behalf of the party, the Conservative Party, and paid for by the party. The PMO's staff is paid for by taxpayers. PMO activities are paid for by taxpayers. Why were this office and the staff who worked there being used to undertake partisan activities? Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party has a single fund for partisan expenditures, including partisan expenditures by their leader, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We know that Nigel Wright controlled funds in the Prime Minister's office. We know he controlled funds at the Conservative Party. Has the Prime Minister ordered that these funds be audited to make sure that Nigel Wright didn't make any other illegal or unethical payments to either himself or Conservative senators?
Very good. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
The Conservative Fund of Canada is, in fact, audited every year. Thanks.
Yesterday, the Minister for Heritage said that the Conservatives did not, and I quote, have access to a personal check by Nigel Wright. But today, we learn that the Prime Minister in Europe is indicating that he actually does have access to the check, but he's refusing to make it public. How can the Conservatives explain this contradiction? Does the Prime Minister's office have access to the $90,000 check? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Quite simply, no, Mr. Speaker. It's not what the Prime Minister said in Europe today. What he stressed was that we have an independent process that is underway to look at this issue with the Ethics Commissioner, along with the RCMP, and with the Auditor General. They are looking at this file, and if they want to have the documents associated with these issues, they can certainly have access to those documents. There is a process. It's very clear. It's an independent process from the government, and no, Mr. Speaker, we do not have access to a personal check by Mr. Wright, the Leader of the Opposition.
What's now clear is that they actually do have access to a check. The Prime Minister stood in this House and said, quote, there's no check from the Prime Minister's office. He said that he only knew that Nigel Wright used a personal check because it was, quote, a matter of public record, and because, quote, that's what Mr. Wright told him. It doesn't add up, and it's well past time for some straight answers. If the Prime Minister does not have a copy of the check, why won't he just say so clearly himself? Why is the Prime Minister dodging this question? What's he hiding?
Order. The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Speaker, I just said it very clearly. We do not have access to a private personal check by Nigel Wright. We don't have access to it. It's just the reality. What the Prime Minister has said is that there is, of course, an independent process that has access to any documents that they require in order to answer the questions that the public have about this matter. I've been very clear, as has the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker.
And the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister likes doing imitations. Why doesn't he try imitating an accountable Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, on another subject, the Parliament...
Order. 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 The Honourable Minister of Canadian... Oh, yes, of course, sorry. It's June. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor. I'd appreciate members, if they wish to answer the question, they can feel free to answer, but I'd like them to hold off till the leader's finished putting the question. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We know why they find it so difficult. There are no Conservative role models of an accountable Prime Minister to imitate.
Very good.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer is there to provide non-partisan information to all parliamentarians. The law states that the selection process has to be independent. We've just found out that another Conservative Party hatchet man, the Chief of Staff to the Government House Leader, has been named to the committee to choose the next PBO that will finally be acceptable to the Conservative Party. Does he really think Canadians will put up with that?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is quite wrong. The process that is being followed is exactly the same process that was followed before. In fact, it's a process that is set out into the in law in the Parliament of Canada Act. It, of course, requires that the selection committee be formed and chaired by the parliamentary librarian. That is the requirement of the law. And our government, of course, put in place the position of Parliamentary Budget Officer, and we look forward to the appointment of an objective Parliamentary Budget Officer who can provide the advice to parliamentarians on the legislation that's before us so that we can make reasoned decisions on the proposals we're dealing with.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister stood in this House and said that he had...
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor now, and I expect the House to come to order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister stood in this House and said that he had not been briefed on the audit of Senator Pamela Wallon's expenses. He insisted that he knew nothing. But last week, Senator Wallon revealed that she had indeed briefed the Prime Minister's office in detail. Who's telling the truth, Senator Wallon or the Prime Minister?
Very good.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
First of all, I know on behalf of all members, I'd like to thank the Leader of the NDP for being here today without incident. The Prime Minister has been very clear on this question, and the member opposite knows, the Leader of the NDP opposite knows very well, that there is, of course, an independent audit and examination of this very matter going forward. The Prime Minister has been very clear to all senators, including Senator Wallon, that any expenses have to be paid and have to be associated directly with their responsibilities as a senator, and any expenses that are not associated should come directly from their own personal pocket.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We can expect the Prime Minister himself to come and clear that up for us this week. Is that right?
Mr. Speaker, the whole Conservative network has been smeared by the arrest of one of their star candidates. After he was defeated in 2011, Sauli Jagdal benefited from a job from the Minister of Heritage, and the minister was so happy and said that he had done good work for the Conservatives. So what was the good work that this person did for you? The Honourable Minister of Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the charges are municipal, about municipal issues, not federal, and I haven't heard anything about the charges against him really today, but
If Mr. Zaidel or Mr. Applebaum or anyone is found guilty of having broken the law, they deserve to be fully punished. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Zaidel was a star Conservative candidate. We know he got a patronage job from that minister just days after his defeat. We know that he was going around Mount Royal acting like he was the Member of Parliament and not our distinguished colleague. We know that a little over a year ago, Zaidel joined the Prime Minister at a happy hour pub stop for some Conservative fundraising. We know that Zaidel was arrested today on a series of corruption charges. What we don't know is what was Zaidel doing on the Minister of Heritage's payroll. Tell us.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, as I just finished saying in French very clearly, to be clear, if Mr. Zaidel or Mr. Applebaum have in any way broken the law, they should have the book thrown at them and they should be accountable to the full extent of the law, Mr. Speaker. But with regard to what my office has indeed been doing proudly for the City of Montreal, we've been doing things like investing in important events like Les Francopholies, Le Festival du Jazz, Le Festival Juste pour Rire, inventing in infrastructure, cultural infrastructure in the City of Montreal, like Les 222, the Quartier des Spectacles, and also expanding the programming and the physical space of the Siegel Centre for the Performing Arts. That's the work that indeed my office is very proud of because it'll serve the people of Montreal and all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Halifax.
Well, it's like whack-a-mole, Mr. Speaker. They whack one scandal down and another one pops up. Because the Conservatives' former shadow MP for Mount Royal was arrested this morning. Solly Zaidel is now facing charges of abuse of trust, fraud, and corruption. Mr. Zaidel was praised by the Prime Minister, and he was hired by the Heritage Minister. And then suddenly, without explanation, he left his lucrative ministerial job. Why?
Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
As my colleague knows very well, I found out this morning, of course, we all found out that Mr. Zaidel was under investigation. Now there are charges pending. And if he or Mr. Applebaum or anybody broke the law, they should be punished to the full extent of the law, Mr. Speaker. That's how it works. But the justice system also works best when those who are aware of corruption, like the leader of the NDP, cooperate with police and tell the police about corruption that they know about. The leader of the NDP was offered a bribe 17 years ago, which is a crime, and he didn't report that bribe and that crime to the police. Why was he covering up for corruption in the city of Laval?
Does the Prime Minister regret any of his actions, not Nigel Wright's actions, not Mike Duffy's actions? Does the Prime Minister regret any of his own actions in the Senate scandal?
Very good question. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, as I've said before, we expect that when people are parliamentarians in either House that they'll respect rules, particularly rules obviously regarding expenditure. If they don't, we expect there to be accountability. And that's what we expect when people make mistakes, so we will continue to operate on that basis going forward, Mr. Speaker. And this government, of course, will focus on the real priorities of Canadians, and that's jobs, growth, and making sure we have opportunity for future generations.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On June 5th, the Prime Minister said that no one else in his office knew about Nigel Wright's $90,000 payment to Mike Duffy. Was that true?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I have addressed that question some months ago, in fact. The fact of the matter is this. As we all know, Mr. Wright himself has said this was a decision he took himself. He admits it was an error of judgment, and he's taken full responsibility for his actions, Mr. Speaker. And this government, Mr. Speaker, will continue to take its responsibilities, and those responsibilities are to focus on the real concerns of Canadians, including jobs in the economy. And, Mr. Speaker, that's why we've been working hard and showing the fruits of those labours through things like the Canada-Europe trade agreement.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
As if whether or not the Prime Minister tells the truth to Canadians was not a matter of real concern to Canadians.
Exactly right.
Did Nigel Wright tell the Prime Minister that nobody else in his office, not a soul, knew about the payment of $90,000 to Mike Duffy? Did he tell the Prime Minister that or not? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Wright was quite clear. It was his decision, his responsibility. He accepts responsibility for that decision, just as this government accepts its responsibilities. Our responsibility is to boost growth, job growth, and economic prosperity for Canadians, and we will continue to deliver on those goals. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. When the Prime Minister told all Canadians here in the House that no one in his office was aware of the $90,000 payment to Mike Duffy, did anyone ever tell him that was wrong? Did he even ask himself that question? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I've addressed this question a number of times. Clearly, Mr. Wright made a decision alone. It's his responsibility. He's accepted his responsibility in this matter, just as this government accepts its responsibilities, which is to run the Canadian economy. The Canadian economy has the best performance among G8 countries in a world of uncertainty, and we have certainly met our main goals and the goals of Canadians in that arena.
How are Canadians supposed to know if the Prime Minister's telling the truth if he doesn't even know himself?
Very good. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker. I just heard an NDP member saying, I guess they were saying their party supports the Canada-Europe trade agreement, when their own leader, what he said was there's going to be a hell of a price to pay and a lot of jobs lost in Canada. Today, apparently, they supported it. Yesterday, they said they'd never seen it. And on Friday, they said they were against it. So, Mr. Speaker, what are Canadians to believe? They're to believe that the only party that is focused on the real needs, focused on the economy, and doing things for Canadians is this government.
Nigel Wright said to Mike Duffy, and I quote, "We have been working on lines and a scenario for you that would cover all of your concerns, including cash for repayment." Who's we?
The Honourable Private Secretary of the Prime Minister. What a response.
Very excited.
Where's the... Order. 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 The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister has the floor.
Wow. It's certainly nice to be loved, Mr. Speaker. Listen, the Prime Minister has answered these questions very clearly on a number of occasions with all of the information that he had available to him, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to work closely with authorities on this, and we are providing them any information that they require. In the meantime, there are a lot of issues facing Canada, and we're going to continue to move forward with jobs and economic growth for such things like the Canada-European Union Free Trade Agreement, which brings lots of jobs and opportunity across this country.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The only person who can answer that question is the Prime Minister. Canadians will harshly judge the Prime Minister's silence, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister spoke to Mike Duffy in person on February 13th, was Nigel Wright there too? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the question shows the fact that we've continued to work with the authorities. We've answered all questions on this topic to the best of our information. At the same time, we've continued to work on real reform to the Senate.
From the Senate, that's why we're continuing to move those forward, including elected Senate with term limits, Mr. Speaker, unlike the opposition today, which brought forward a silly motion to apparently end partisanship in the Senate. There's lots of things that are confronting this government, the Canadian people, and we'll get the job done for them, Mr. Speaker.
And the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I don't know why the Prime Minister can't tell the truth. Canadians can handle the truth.
Yeah, exactly right.
On August 21st, long after he resigned, Nigel Wright gave the RCMP a binder full of documents related to the Mike Duffy affair. What's in the binder?
Very good. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, What's clear is that we are continuing to work with authorities, Mr. Speaker, to get to the bottom of this. Mr. Wright has accepted sole responsibility for his actions on this, and we will continue to answer all the questions to the best of our ability and work with authorities on this, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The only person who can answer these questions is the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. Did the Prime Minister or anyone else in his office threaten Mike Duffy with expulsion from the Senate if he didn't go along with the, quote, cash for repayment scheme cooked up in his office?
Very good. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Again, Mr. Speaker, Nigel Wright has accepted full responsibility on this matter. We've answered all of the questions that have been posed to us to the best of our ability. What this underlines, though, Mr. Speaker, is that Canadians want accountability in the Senate. That's why we put on the table a number of reforms, which include Senate elections and term limits for senators. We hope that the NDP and the Liberals, in fact, will join us in bringing that accountability to the Senate, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
In December 2012, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff said that several senators had deals cooked up similar to that of Mike Duffy. Who were they?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said on a number of occasions, and I'll continue to say, Mr. Wright has accepted full responsibility for this. The Prime Minister has answered all the questions on this, and we're continuing to work with authorities. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of issues that we are confronting, including a trade deal with the European Union, including crime and safety in our communities. There are a lot of things Canadians want us to focus on. We'll continue to focus on those issues while working with the authorities to get to the bottom of this.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
How about crime and safety here?
Very good.
On June 5th, the Prime Minister said that he was, quote, not aware of the results of the audit of Pamela Wallins' expenses. Was that true? Only the Prime Minister can answer.
Very good. Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Answers, of course.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On May 17th, when the Prime Minister kicked Pamela Wallin out of the Conservative caucus, was he aware that the audit of Pamela Wallin's expenses had already turned up $40,000 in illegal spending?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
It's not loud. And Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition's questions highlight the importance of us continuing to work with authorities to get to the bottom of this, Mr. Speaker. We've answered all questions that have been posed to us to the best of our ability. We'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, Nigel Wright has accepted sole responsibility for this, and we will continue to move forward with Senate reform. We'll continue to move forward with opening opportunity and jobs for Canadians across this country, Mr. Speaker, such as the Canada-European Free Trade Agreement, which will benefit our communities, which will benefit our small businesses, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue working on behalf of Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what changed? What changed between February 13th, when the Prime Minister personally vouched for Pamela Wallin's expenses, and May 17th, when the Prime Minister kicked Pamela Wallin out of the Conservative caucus? If the Prime Minister was not aware, as he claims, of that $40,000 in illegal expenses, then what changed?
Very good. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what's clear is this. Canadians expect that all of us, not only in this place but in the Senate, that when we're entrusted with their hard-earned tax dollars, that we will act responsibly. The Prime Minister was quite clear yesterday when he said not only should the letter of the law be followed, but also the spirit of the law, Mr. Speaker. Most of us, or at least some of us, come from the private sector background, and when we're caught or when somebody is caught padding their expenses, they're fired. They don't have that opportunity in the Senate. Canadians have said they want change. That's why we put on the table reforms which will allow us to elect senators, which will limit them to 9 years in office. Hopefully they'll come on board and vote for those as well.
That concludes question period for today. Orders of the day, order du jour.
made on opposition motion in the name of Mr. Scott.